It's all creamy. It's a creamy Pokemon.
Everybody's thinking about me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out again, but I feel alright.
All creamy. Anyway, I think it's safe to say, as we kick off this video, that Pokémon Sword and Shield is a somewhat controversial game. Actually, now that I think about it, is it fair to say it's a controversial game? Because you got to talk about it in plurals, in terms of describing the game, or just saying the game's name. It's Pokémon Sword and Shield. But then I go on to say it's a controversial game, singular, you see. Even though technically it is two games, but basically, if we're being honest, it is the same game, just with different animals in each one. One of them's got a bird in it. How about that for variety? It's the same game. It's the same game with different names and a few different little bits in it. But then, gotta hand it to them. Pokemon ran a successful con in the late 90s, and they've kept that scammer running for over 20 years. Thumbs up. I'm being somewhat facetious, and I've just knocked my glass while I'm trying to talk. I've done this about 5 times. I don't like any of the takes I've done. We're sticking with this one come what may, even though I'm now going off on a tangent about the recording of this video instead of talking about the game. Let's talk about the game, shall we? Let's not talk about what they did to Ekans. Let's not talk about the fact that Ekans is in it, okay? Many pundits, including myself, have talked about Dexit. The decision to cut over half of the existing Pokemon roster, so that we've only got like hundreds in it instead of lots of hundreds in it, and none of my favourites made it in. No Ekans, no Lickitung, no Chingling. What's this all about? So that's been a disappointment, you know. Even if whether or not you understand the reasons why the cuts were made, if you want to say Game Freak was being lazy, I don't think laziness is the reason. I'll talk a little bit about that later. Actually, no, I'll just talk about it now. They don't need to keep releasing so many Pokemon games. They are clearly having to cut some corners here and there and keeping, like, archaic, dated gameplay design. Because here's the thing. The best thing you can say about Pokémon Sword and Shield is that it's a Pokemon game. And the worst thing you can say about Pokémon Sword and Shield is that it's a Pokemon game. The core gameplay loop, the foundational aspects are all still really good, and there's a simplicity to it that has let it last for so long, for decades now, without getting truly old, but it still looks and feels and plays like it did 20 years ago, without many concessions made for modern gameplay design, like the fact that everything's so convoluted. Even picking up an item off the ground requires about 3 text boxes to tell you what you did, what it is, and where it went. It's a nightmare. You just pick up items in other games. You can just see an item on the floor and just pick it the fuck up. Battles could do with some speeding up. Like, you can speed up the text boxes, like the text that scrolls across them. I didn't do that in time for this video, but I have done that, thank God, now. But just having to sit through the same things over and over again after hours and hours of gameplay, the same text information, the same little animations and stuff. There's only so much in the menu you can cut from it and prune away, and you're still left with a game that wastes a lot of time, and it's just very contrived in places, and just has a lot of typical Game Freak design, like the fact that certain sound settings are unlocked by finding an NPC, and you get an item from them to access menu, like, sound settings. It's ridiculous. There are some quality of life changes. I like how much more easy it is to upgrade Pokemon, to level them up, and keep newly acquired Pokemon roughly at the same level of your existing party. If you take part in raid battles, which we'll talk about in a moment, you can get a lot of experience raising candy items and stuff like that. So there are little improvements here and there. Some things that are not so good, like the online. The online is a disaster. First of all, it doesn't tell you properly as a new player that you've got to go into the online menu and then press a button to go properly online to access, like, everyone who's playing it. And even when you do that, I've struggled to find games. Like, I want to do those raid battles where you go into a den and fight a big Pokemon with other players. But every time I've tried to start one, no one joins my game. And when I try and join other people's games, it just disconnects. It doesn't allow me to connect to their game. and then I've got to go refresh a list of stickers or tags or whatever it is, because the menu's just a mess. All the menus in this game are a mess. But I like it. I didn't want to start this take of like the 5th time I've tried to do this video. I didn't want to start it too negative, because I'm having fun with it, because at its core it's still a Pokemon game, and Pokemon games are good in general. I've compared to Pokemon as a series to Dynasty Warriors before, and I only quasi mean that as an insult, because I like the Dynasty Warriors series, and one of the things I like about it is it's a really simple idea that they've managed to keep doing in a routine, loopy way that I find satisfying. Some games can just get repetitive and boring, but there are certain ones that just have such a satisfying, almost comforting feel to their repetition. And Pokemon is like that. There's just something almost soothing about just going out and catching little colourful frogs. You know, there's a magic frog, I'll throw a ball at it. Is it still in the ball? Yes, now it's my magical frog. That somehow hasn't gotten old. I just wish the overall game didn't feel quite that dated. It just feels like slow and stuttered in places. Even when you do make little tweaks like speed up the text box text, it's still so... I don't mind it being formulaic, I do mind it being slow in its formula. With so much repeated, almost patronising information constantly thrown at you. Stuff you've read hundreds of times after you've played the game for a few hours. It just gets really quite old quite quickly. I do like some of the back to basics structure of the narrative. I like that they've gone back to the idea of just being I say back to the idea, it's practically the same in every game, but they've reduced some of the more heady narratives, so they're focused a lot more on just trying to be a good Pokemon trainer and going from gym to gym. I don't mind that they've gone back to that well and haven't really expanded on it. They've just made it a lot more innocent this time. Even the major antagonistic team, like the Team Rocket equivalent, Team Yell, they're just idiots. That's the whole point of them. They're over-enthusiastic idiots who don't necessarily mean too much harm, they just get in the way. And I find that quite fun. That said, about 65 to 70% of the narrative is mawkish rubbish that annoys me. Just full of people saying they're giving it their all, or going on and on and on about Dynamax Pokemon. That's one of the new gimmicks here, which we'll talk about in a moment, Dynamax Pokemon. And all of the NPCs shill it so hard like it's fucking Poochie the dog. Also, I don't like Hop, your friendly rival character. He's a cloying little shit. So, let's talk about one of the big elements, shall we? The wild area. Some people have called this an open world. It's not necessarily that. I think it's closer to an old-style Legend of Zelda overworld, like Ocarina of Time or something like that. It's just a big, wide open space full of grassy patches that Pokemon hang out in, and it connects a few areas, a few of the more, like, towns and things. And you can spend quite a bit of time in there. There are a lot of Pokemon that will appear at different times and in different weathers, and that's quite cool to explore. There are little dens dotted around, and you can dive into those to take on gigantic Dynamaxed Pokemon. And for the most part, I've enjoyed doing that. You can turn on the online features and see lots of other trainers running around, and you can talk to them. You can't actually talk to the player, but you can get some pre-written text if you interact with their character models and get an item from them. That's neat. I like seeing other trainers run around doing things. It does tank the performance at times. Sometimes running around the overworld with other players, once you've connected fully online, it can stutter and slow down, which is a shame. And I do wish that just the online menus in general were not shit, and that the online worked better and wasn't shit. But what can you do? The major drawback to the wild area is it's sort of counterintuitive, because it wants to encourage you to explore and be adventurous and ambitious, but at the same time, there are lots of over-leveled Pokemon running around that you can't catch because you haven't progressed far enough into the game. You've got to keep beating gym leaders to earn new badges that let you catch higher level Pokemon. Even if the Pokemon is just like one level above your current party of Pokemon. It gets very annoying. I'm genuinely irritated by it, especially since they could just make the Pokemon unusable until a certain level. Just make it so that Pokemon you've caught at a certain level can't be used, or at least used properly, or whatever, until you've acquired the appropriate gym badge. That's what other RPGs do with high-level gear. It's quite simple. It's irritating and discouraging to find a Pokemon, especially one that might catch your eye, that you like the look of, or you're already a fan of it, and you can't get it yet. And you're not even sure if it'll, when the next time it will appear in the wild area is. It just turned me off of catching half the Pokemon most of the time. And I know they've done that in some fashion to avoid catching overleveled Pokemon and using them in battle and cakewalking your way through the rest of the game. But here's the thing. If you spend even a moderate amount of time doing raid battles and just hanging out in the wild area, or using those overleveled Pokemon to grind, the game's going to be a cakewalk anyway. Like I said, some of these Pokemon I couldn't catch because they were too strong were a level or two above my current party. And by the time I go back to the story and start taking on gym leaders, I'm knocking their Pokemon out in a hit. So stopping you from catching overleveled Pokemon doesn't even counter the thing they want to counter. Anyway, it's nice, but in a typical Game Freak, or just games on Nintendo systems in general, there's just these weird caveats that are strange and don't really serve the intended purpose, if you can even fathom the intended purpose. I was going to talk about raid battles as well, wasn't I? So those are cool. Basically, there are these... When a Pokemon Dynamaxes, it gets big and can now do big flashy moves. It's a gimmick, more or less. Just something they can use in trailers to market the game and convince you it's new when it's just more Pokemon. And some of these Dynamax Pokemon hang out in dens. They're little clumps of rocks around in the wild area that glow. And you can dive in there and take on a giant Pokemon that is usually powerful, unless you've been leveling as much as I have, in which case you can knock them out pretty quickly too. But they're supposed to be quite powerful, and you've got a time limit, a set number of turns in which to beat them and catch them if you so choose. And there's a lot of cool rewards for doing that. You can get experience candies and other rare goodies, and theoretically you can play those online. I've only managed to consistently get online when my friend Laura Kate Dale is playing, and I'll just jump into her game. Like I said, I can't get anyone to join my games. I would spend a lot more time raid battling if the online was good or competent or not 15 years old feeling. I'll take any of those. I'll take a combination of any of that, thanks. But otherwise, it is fun, and I wish I had more incentive to raid battle, because that could keep me entertained for quite some time, especially since those rewards are really good. So it's basically, I've more or less said everything I want to say about it, I think. At the end of the day, it's more Pokemon. I could talk about the audio visuals, actually. That's one thing I wanted to get out the way before I wrapped up. The music's really good. That's typical for Pokemon. I really like the new gym leader music. When you battle a gym leader, there's this really nice sort of hyperactive, really enthusiastic beat that plays. That's cool. Pretty much all the music is nice. The sound effects are not so much. A lot of them just feel, again, really old-fashioned. Pokemon at this point, and part of this is because it's on the Switch and not just a dedicated handheld, it's more noticeable how ancient and a little bit cheap some of it looks and sounds. Pokemon making bleeps and bloops rather than animal noises or saying their name like in the cartoon. I'm over Pokemon that just go with really tinny sounding scratchy noises. I'm over that. As for the visuals, the monster designs are nice as usual. The new ones, some of them are good. I like some of the Galarian variants, like the Weezing, which is basically a big capitalist with a stovepipe chimney hat. That's fun. But the animations are rubbish. I've seen some people there's been back and forth on this. Some people insist they're great, some people don't. When you're camping, like, you can camp in the game and interact with your Pokemon, play little games with them, or, like, throw a ball and be like, catch that ball, and the Pokemon will be like, yeah, probably, I'll do that, that's good. And you can cook food for them and whatever. Some of those are quite endearing, but for the most part, especially when you battle, they're just woeful at times. Embarrassing sometimes. Like, certain moves that want to show a Pokemon jumping up and down, and it'll just move the character model just up and down rapidly. Like someone clicked on it with a mouse and just wobbled it. It's come on. Come on. So yeah, not too fond of that. It's not an ugly game. It's just like everything else, kind of dated, which is a shame. But outside of that, this is more Pokemon, which is fine, but they do not need to be churning these games out like they have. They do not need to be churning out so many Pokemon games, not giving themselves enough time to just properly refresh the series. I've said in previous videos that to counter the controversy with Dex here, what they should have done was bring none of the old Pokemon back, have an entirely fresh Pokédex, keep it simple, go back to 151 and reboot the game. Take your time with it. Spend time making the Pokemon actually animate properly in battle so they feel alive, so they don't just feel like two-dimensional play actors. Actually drag the series into the modern age, take out some of the foundational stuff that feels so old and sluggish and slow now, and present the whole thing as an honest-to-God reboot. That's what Pokemon needs as a series. It needs a full-on reboot. But I don't think Game Freak has enough time to do that because they're always working on the next one. In fact, Pokemon, I'll say this, is maybe one of the few games out there that would justify becoming a live service. And I do not say that often because I think way too many games jump on board that live service bandwagon pathetically. But Pokemon might actually work with that. But it can't in its current state because they have no time to make an online that's robust and consistent and works. They need to take a couple years. They need to take a couple years, start from the beginning, obviously keep a lot of the things that have kept the series successful. That core basic gameplay loop, like I said, is still satisfying, but it needs real modernization. Not a few quality of life improvements here and there, not tweaks, not gimmicks added on top. They need to go back to the drawing board, extract the elements that work, and make a properly new game. But I'm not sure that will ever happen. And I guess they're under no obligation, they certainly feel no onus to make it happen, because Pokémon Sword and Shield is really successful. It's sold a lot, as Pokemon tends to do. So ultimately, I don't think they're ever going to fix it, or ever going to change it, or ever stop making these games constantly, because they print money. And I'm going to keep playing it, because despite my many complaints, and despite being frequently irritated and annoyed as fuck with the game, I am continually compelled to play it because I still get a lot of raw satisfaction from the fundamentals. And most importantly of all, this Pokemon looks like cum, so I'm giving it a 7 out of 10.